Now that the holidays are over, many of us are looking for simple and effective ways to improve our health in the new year. One way you can do that is with a detox to start the new year. Our bodies are exposed to toxins like alcohol, heavy metals, and microplastics. As a result, we experience brain fog, low energy levels, and mood swings, among other things. We've created a product to help naturally detoxify your body called Defender Detox. And for a limited time, we are offering 50% off with discount code NEWU50 at checkout. Don't miss out on this simple way to elevate your health in 2025. Visit centurionlabs.com to order Defender Detox today. Today on the Frontline Health Podcast.
But I think the FDA's allowed some unsafe products, and I would say even some ineffective products, or not very effective, in recent years. So we've seen vaccine issues, we've seen issues with certain products on safety, and personally, I think the FDA would be better at making sure the products are safe and worry less about efficacy, because I think there's enough social media awareness that if you were to take a product and you took it for a month and there was no value with it, and then another 1,000 people took that product and there was no value in it, most people are going to stop buying it.
Right.
So there is greater word of mouth now than there was 100 years ago when the FDA started. And I think we can, as consumers, do a much better job of regulating it ourselves, but make sure that the safety piece is definitely coming into play. And that's...
Welcome back to the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion Health. I'm Evan Patrick, here as always with founder and CEO Troy Duell. Every week we dive into pressing health issues, challenge conventional narratives, and explore ways to live a healthier life. Troy, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Evan. Super excited about today because we're diving into a topic that I think is a pretty hot topic. I mean, we're talking about food and where it comes from and whether we can trust it these days. And to me, that's a pretty big deal because we're seeing things all over the news, we're hearing things, and who knows? So hopefully we can get some answers and go through that and come to a good conclusion here today.
That's right. And this is actually one of those things that in a previous podcast, I think it was a Health Headlines episode, you started to kind of explain some of these things, and we just didn't have nearly enough time to break down all the news that there is out there with our food supply today. And so I'm really glad that we have this opportunity. Today we'll explore how farming practices in the U.S. have impacted the nutritional quality of crops, dive into the controversial topic of raw milk, take a hard look at government overregulation of food production, and discuss the mysterious trend of food processing plants catching fire. It's a lot to unpack, so let's get started.
All right, let's do it.
So Troy, let's start with something that I've been reading a lot about lately. This is the idea that our modern farming techniques are causing a steady decline in the nutritional value of our crops. Is this true?
Well, interestingly enough, and you'll be happy to hear this, there was a study that came out of the University of Texas.
Hook 'em horns.
That's our Texas guy. And in 2004, they actually analyzed the food from the 50s until the 90s. And when they did that, they found that there were significant declines in the nutrient value of those foods, but particularly the calcium levels, the iron levels, vitamin B2, and vitamin C in different fruits and vegetables that they looked at.
So that's really shocking that we're seeing such a significant decline over these years. What is causing the decline in the nutrient values in these foods?
That is a great question, and I think really what it comes down to is our modern farming techniques has really gotten more into size and the speed of getting things done instead of going back to the quality of the food. So we've really been about yield. We want things to grow faster, we want things to grow bigger, and because we think it's faster and bigger, we're providing the same nutrients. But the truth is it's depleting the soil, it's not having the full amount of time for those fruits and vegetables to actually grow and get the nutrients that they need to absorb from the soil that they normally would.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because one of the things I've heard a lot of people say about the standard American diet is that it's calorically dense, but it's nutritionally poor.
That is very true. And some of it goes to what we talked about, the speed, but it also goes back to, you mentioned it, the soil, and I think that was on our Health Headlines podcast, where it's the soil levels and the soil itself that's getting depleted. We're not doing the same techniques that we used to and letting certain areas or parts of the farm go fallow and really allow it to redevelop the soil. And we've really gotten to this place where we just want to produce more food, and we've forgotten that it's not just how much food we're producing, but it's the quality of the food that we're producing.
Right. So is this just an issue in the United States, or is this a worldwide thing that we're seeing?
Interesting. For the most part, it is just the United States. I think it happens around the world, but more so here. And that's because Europe has actually done a much better job of starting to legislate opportunities to have soil health and crop rotation that come into play in order to allow that soil to grow. And the U.S. could really catch up when it comes to that type of thing.
Why do you think that's the case? Is it simply more profitable for our major food producers to grow the same crops? What's the reasoning why our policies are lagging behind other countries that are doing things differently?
It's probably a little bit of both of those things. First, we know that if you're just growing one type of crop and you're doing it over and over and over, you're getting some efficiencies there, and you're probably getting better at it. You feel like you're doing better. And if we're growing lots of produce and we're doing it quickly and we're getting better looking produce and vegetables and fruit, then we sometimes fool ourselves into thinking, oh, we're doing a really good job because we're producing more, they look better, they're bigger. But we've got to get back to understanding that it's not just bigger and faster, it's what's inside it that really counts.
Mm-hmm. Let's shift gears to another controversial topic, raw milk. Proponents say that it's healthier and it's more nutritious than pasteurized milk. Critics say it's dangerous. What is the truth about raw milk?
That is the $1 million question, because it seems to be the new fad that's out there. Everybody's wanting to drink raw milk because you get more of the microbiomes, you're getting more of the nutrition that comes along with it, but it's kind of a risk versus reward type scenario. So we know that there are beneficial bacteria and nutrients that are lost during pasteurization. They've done some studies that show that, but we also know that it could help with taking away certain risk of that milk itself. So you've got both sides of the coin there, and you have to be a little bit careful with it. But there are studies that have also shown that if you drink raw milk, it actually reduced the risk of asthma and allergies in kids.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Why is it still so controversial if there are known benefits to raw milk?
I mean, it all comes back with everything to safety. We know that there are certain bacteria that are pretty dangerous when you're talking about raw milk. So if you get E. coli, which we've all heard of, we've heard of salmonella, and then listeria. So those three components, we know pasteurization will actually kill those things. So you're going to have a less of a chance of getting sick if it's been pasteurized. So we know that raw milk is about 150 times more likely to cause those outbreaks compared to pasteurized milk. So that's, I think, what everything is really hinging on within the raw milk controversy that's going on right now, is safety versus the reward of and the benefits of the health that comes along with it.
Mm-hmm. And this sounds like a really nuanced topic. We kind of have a problem in our world today where people will buckle down on whatever side of a controversial issue they fall on, and they will take that position to the absolute extreme and make these statements, just planting their feet in the sand, digging their feet in the ground on a particular issue, when really there's a larger discussion to be had, and something might be beneficial for some people and not for others. Mm-hmm. I heard a very interesting explanation recently. I don't know if there's merit to this, but it made sense, at least in my mind, and it was in defense of raw milk. The idea is that when pasteurization was invented in 1864, cities were growing in Europe and in the United States. This process was called urbanization. You saw cities being built without the infrastructure that we know today that's needed to sustain and keep large cities clean. Things like sanitation, plumbing, waste removal. So because these programs had not been, and this infrastructure had not been developed yet, you saw cities having a lot more issues with the spread of bacteria and viruses, disease, all that sort of thing. You had farms just on the outskirts of these urban centers where animals are being raised in these very unsanitary conditions. And so the idea is that they were exposed, the cows were exposed to a lot of bacteria, and as they consumed that, they passed that on to humans in the milk. And so pasteurization was a process that was very necessary in a time when farm animals were being raised in these types of conditions. But now, most farms are a lot cleaner than this, and we have better ways of dealing with waste removal and that kind of thing. So some people argue there's not as big of a risk. But as you just said, the CDC reports they have data that says that raw milk is 150 times more likely to cause outbreaks. So the question, is raw milk worth the risk?
You know, I think you brought up some really good points. When pasteurization came along, it was in the 1860s, and truthfully, during the 1860s, they were not yet to the point where they understood that washing their hands before a surgery would pass on bacteria and infection.
Wow.
So we've come a long way when it comes to sanitation and understanding how these germs are passed on. So I'm a firm believer, if you find a trusted source and you see their facility and you see that they're washing their hands, they're practicing good hygiene, then more than likely you're not going to have any issues. But if you can't get to that source and you can't see what's going on from the standpoint of how they're producing the milk, then the safer choice would probably be going with the pasteurized milk and making sure that everything's been killed in there. Because the truth is, the same thing can happen on any fruit, any vegetable, anything we have. You can still get E. coli, you can still get salmonella, depending on how they fertilize the crops. And we've even heard of outbreaks of salmonella and E. coli in certain crops that are out there with tomatoes or other things. So it can happen with anything, and I think it all comes down to how good of a job are the people who are milking the cows and taking care of those things. Do they have good hygiene?
Yeah.
Are they practicing good sanitation skills?
Yeah, and I would have to imagine that this is a risk that might be worth it for some younger, healthier people, but for somebody who is immune compromised or has different health issues, it's just simply not a smart decision for somebody like that to make. If they're putting themselves at unnecessary risk, there are other ways that they can nourish themselves than just raw milk.
Totally agree.
So let's talk about government involvement in the food industry. Some argue that overregulation is stifling innovation and driving up costs. What's your take?
I think it really is kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I think the regulations are essential for food safety, which is good. We want to have safe food supply. We want to have safe supplements. We want to have safe pharmaceuticals. But on the other hand, we are seeing with the FDA and the USDA, we're still seeing outbreaks because the oversight has not been very good. And I think we see a lot of overreaches when it comes to those things. For example, I think you can find small farmers that are having more compliance costs than they really necessarily need to have, because the government comes in and imposes these certain things on them and regulations that I think would free them up to provide a better product and reduce the cost for people like you and I that don't farm and get a higher quality product at still a low risk. And honestly, I think if you could get that out of the way and reduce some of those regulations, it would allow more individuals to have small farms and sell more products that way. And I think it would help our food supply get even healthier, because most of those small farmers are the ones who are going to be more organic and more inclined to not push the envelope with faster and bigger type fruits and vegetables, but they'll be more nutritious.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any examples of this that come to mind in recent news where the government has maybe overstepped its boundaries and caused these types of problems?
Yeah, I think we could go back to the raw milk issue. There was actually a case where an Amish man up in Pennsylvania was selling raw milk, and the Department of Agriculture, as well as the Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania, came in and shut down his facility. And they said that there were some testimonies saying that it had been connected to a couple of E. coli outbreaks, but then there were others that said that there weren't. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that as a consumer, you can make that choice, and if you know there are risks involved with it, then you should go out and be able to make that choice if you want to have that risk. Mm-hmm. And I think you can certainly see that when it comes to raw milk. You can see it with new pharmaceutical products. You can see it with supplements even, where again and again, as the government gets involved more and more, things get more and more expensive.
And I'm with you. As long as a producer will put on the label and be transparent about what is actually in this. I know we've joked before about how you look on the label of some foods and it'll say some bioengineered ingredients, and it won't say what those things are. You just have no idea what it is.
Very
and
true.
That's acceptable to the FDA. But an Amish man who's being honest and saying, hey, I'm selling raw milk, I'm not calling it anything other than that, can be severely penalized.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, and I think we've certainly gone off the cliff when it comes to that side of the regulatory piece.
Mm-hmm. And how can people make sure that the products they're consuming are actually safe and effective?
I think a lot of it comes down to, is it a trusted source? Was it a referral that you got? How did you find out about this? And just do your own research on, especially when it comes to food that you're taking in. So farmers markets, raw milk, whatever it is, finding trusted sources. And if you can get a referral to those people and you hear lots of good things about it, that's always good. The other great thing is go spend some time at those farms and see how they run their operation. Mm-hmm. Is it clean? Does everything look sanitary? If it does, then have at it.
And could you speak to this a little bit as the owner of a pharmaceutical and a supplement company? What process do you have to go through to make sure that products are safe and that and that the FDA has been effective in keeping unsafe products off the market? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think the process is both good and bad. So the FDA is charged with trying to make products that are safe and effective. But I really think they've missed the mark in recent years, kind of on both sides of the coin, because we've seen, and part of it is because of what they call regulatory capture, meaning that the pharmaceutical companies are basically running the FDA because they're the ones funding it. But pharmaceuticals should go through trials proving that they're safe and effective. I think that's a good thing. Over-the-counter products, they're in a category where the FDA says, all right, we've had these on the market for a long time. We see that they're safe. We also see that they have value and they work. So we're going to allow the consumer, because they're so safe, to make the choice on whether they should have it or not. Pharmaceuticals and OTCs, over-the-counter products, both have testing requirements of the ingredients as well as the final testing of their products to see what kind of contaminants are in it and to make sure that if it says it's got 20 milligrams of a product, that it's got the full 20 milligrams of the product and not less than that. Supplements, on the other hand, are a little bit more limited in how they're marketed, so they can't speak to certain things, but they don't have to go through trials and testing. And unfortunately, because of that, there are a lot of bad products out there, so you're going to want to use those products that have testing of the ingredients before they put it in, and also of the final product, because you want as much testing on there as possible to make sure that it has what it says it has in it and it doesn't have what you don't want in it, which are some of the contaminants. And then if you get back to kind of the FDA's piece, and I'll probably get some people maybe a little riled up with this in my view of these things, but I think the FDA's allowed some unsafe products, and I would say even some ineffective products, or not very effective, in recent years. So we've seen vaccine issues, we've seen issues with certain products on safety, and personally, I think the FDA would be better at making sure the products are safe and worry less about efficacy, because I think there's enough social media awareness that if you were to take a product and you took it for a month and there was no value with it, and then another 1,000 people took that product and there was no value in it, most people are going to stop buying it.
Right.
So there is greater word of mouth now than there was 100 years ago when the FDA started. And I think we can, as consumers, do a much better job of regulating it ourselves, but make sure that the safety piece is definitely coming into play. And that's where I think the FDA should do a much more stringent job of making sure that wherever these things are made, it's clean, it's not having any contaminants in it, and then just leave the other as it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, the FDA has even admitted recently to certain things. We think of red dye number 3 being
That's
banned.
right.
We think of for being dangerous.
Yep.
And then we can think of, even prior to that, phenylephrine being labeled as ineffective.
That's right.
And so the FDA is doing these things, and you can't help but wonder how much of it's politically motivated, especially when the new administration that has just come in has made this topic a priority. And so you want your government agencies to be doing what they have promised the American people, and that the American people are paying them to do.
That's right. And unfortunately, as we've heard kind of all along, we know that studies and statistics can always be massaged to make something look better than it is, or even look worse than it is. So I think public opinion would go much, much further than even some of this testing, as long as everything they're bringing out is safe. We don't want anybody to die. We don't want anybody to get sick. But let people try it, and if they get better with it, then hey, have at it.
Yeah. Well, we haven't quite gotten to the point of conspiracy theory yet, but we're close, so we might as well head in that direction.
That's right.
Or at least get closer. Let's address another topic that has been raising some eyebrows. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a number of food processing plants mysteriously burned down. Like I said, conspiracy theorists are really having a field day with this. So what is going on?
It's interesting because since about 2021, I think we've been on average about 150 to 200 processing plants actually burning down. There was National Fire Protection Association said that the rates of food manufacturing plants burning had increased 25% over the last decade. So the question is, why?
Yeah, do we know why these food manufacturing plants are burning down?
I don't know that we do. I know they've done studies on it. They've been looking at them. Maybe it's because some of these facilities are older and they don't have as good of equipment, and they haven't upgraded their equipment. They're not maintaining it, or there could be cases of arson. We don't know, as they continue to look at all these pieces and make sure what is happening can be controlled. And if it's arson, then we need to really be looking at our food infrastructure, because if we lose our food, we lose a lot of our ability to do things, because that is probably where we need to spend more time putting security and oversight on our food and keeping it safe than a lot of the other things that we seem to do.
So obviously this is concerning, but at this point, realistically, should consumers be worried about food shortages as a result of the burning down of food processing plants?
I don't think so. I've heard numbers that there are roughly 36,000 food processing plants across the U.S. So we're talking about a little less than 1% of those in the last 3 to 5 years. So I don't know that there should be an issue with that. But if we continue to see these things rise and we continue to see them grow, then we certainly need to look at it. And it is probably better to look at it now, come up with ways that we can keep it safe, and figure out better ways for security around it, And in the long run, I think it'll do us all a service by doing that.
Well, Troy, as always, I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for breaking down these complicated topics.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it.
And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into this episode of the Frontline Health Podcast. If you found today's discussion helpful, please share it with a friend, subscribe, and leave us a review. Stay healthy, stay informed, and we'll see you next time. If you enjoyed what you heard today on the podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. We would love to hear your comments or questions about anything we've talked about on the show. For more health news, tips, and insights, follow us at Centurion Labs on Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And for safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA to help you elevate your health and life, visit CenturionLabs.com. We look forward to you joining us next time on the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion.